Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Adam Berger. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Netrix. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we are going to be hosting a cybersecurity roundtable where we're actually going to revisit the topic of the emerging security threat of the multi-factor authentication bypass. This is actually the second webinar we've done on this topic. In the previous webinar, we did cover high-level strategies around passwordless technology and how you can use various technologies to help prevent, detect, and also respond to this threat. We have seen so much of this attack attempt in our security labs and our SOC that we really felt, for the purposes of our clients and also the general community, actually going a step deeper, looking down at some of the various technologies and some of the tunings that can be done of certain technologies that can help disrupt this attack method. Really give some detailed information around what you can do from a technology perspective, also from a tuning perspective, to get in front of this threat and actually give some more detail. And so with that, we actually brought some of our speakers back and a new speaker here to talk about this topic in a bit more detail. Joining us again, we have Rich Lilly, who's a technologist here and field CTO at Netrix for security. Rich brings over 25 years of consulting experience. He's also a leading SME in the Microsoft security, compliance, and identity space. Welcome, Rich. Thanks for joining us. We also have Chris Clark, who's also on our last webinar, who's a manager over our Microsoft security team here at Netrix. Chris brings over 20 years of consulting experience, and he specializes in Microsoft security for the last decade. And joining us new for this webinar is Ivan Petkov, who is actually the Director of Security and Managed Services here at Netrix. He brings 15 years of consulting experience to the table and also has the last 10 years in the security space. And Ivan is actually over our SOC team here at Netrix and is going to give us some information around what our SOC sees and what we do with our clients when it relates to this threat, to kind of give us a bit more deeper on the topic as well. So thank you guys for joining us. Welcome. And so just to kick off the call and get a little refresher for the audience, I'd like to kick it over to Rich just to give us a quick refresh on, what is the MFA bypass? Why is it something you should be concerned about? We did cover this in the last webinar, but to sort of re-immerse everybody in that concern before we dive deeper, Rich, can you maybe just hop in and sort of set the stage for us?
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it, Adam. So I think this is something that I'm talking to all my customers about. It's something that we're seeing messaged out there in the cybersecurity community from Microsoft, from other competitive vendors like Okta and Ping as well. The reality is this attack is not new by any means at this point. Most of the core tools we see out there have been used for at least 1 or 2 years by this point, but the ability of some of these attacks to convert into actual events is risen significantly, especially the proliferation of some of these tools being more easily available. Also now with things like Gen AI, you can more easily manipulate content to meet some of these attacks. So let's talk about and remind everyone what MFA bypass is first. So, when we talk about MFA bypass, it's termed in a variety of different ways, but generally the threat is an MFA bypass. Is that what happens is that users will often hijack user sessions. There's a bunch of different ways you can do this. The most common one that I'll talk about in a little bit here is essentially a man-in-the-middle type of attack. We'll detail a little bit more about how that works. But essentially, we somehow steal the user's token from phishing page, from unauthorized access to their machine, to some backend services. And what happens is we essentially have the ability of pulling this token out. In many cases, this token in the past was kind of just a secure version of their username and password, essentially referenced as an access token. And what some of these tools do today is they extract the strong authentication part of that token. Now, once that's extracted, and as a token as a whole, that can then be used or weaponized to really act as that user. And the unfortunate part is that whether it's through phishing events or social engineering, et cetera, is that once an attacker is somewhere in the middle or somewhere able to get that token, is that most what we think of or have thought of for years now as traditional MFA methods, your phone call, your text message, OTP or one-time passcode, or even push notification, fortunately, they all become ineffective because they're not protected in such a way that the credential is secure from that type of theft. And the biggest challenge and why we're all here today is that presents an issue that really most traditional MFA methods that people have spent all this time rolling out for years and many have just kind of caught up, they really aren't the most effective way of protecting those credentials today. And we'll talk a little bit more in all of our sections about how to protect those and some methods you can implement. I think a visual representation is always pretty good to start with. This is one that I think we source from Microsoft or online, but I think this is a good way to kind of illustrate how these attacks work. And maybe, for those that are attending have seen this before. Many times an attacker will spin up a fake website using something like a homographic domain, something that's very similar to a production name of a domain like test.com, using slightly different character or using some alternative characters so it looks like test.com. And they'll also maybe do things like send emails in bulk and without the right phishing prevention on inbound email. These things can get past some systems, so it's definitely a multi-layered approach here. But say that phishing email gets through and it appears like you have to reset your Workday password or reset your M365 password or click to log in to your payroll system because your paycheck is due tomorrow. Any number of types of events are good examples that are out there today. In many cases, these emails or these websites, they contain redirector pages, and they'll kind of silently redirect. And if you're not just like reading every single fine point of the URL, you'll note that they're likely manipulating some of the different domains or pages that exist today. Now the downside is I can essentially relocate someone to an M365 tenant, and it may even look like your sign-in page, your logo, because of how some of these attacks will work. And many times they'll get prompted and not phished, right? Someone's not entering their user and password in a different page or entering it in a Microsoft page, for instance, or an Okta page, et cetera. They go through that process. They respond to their MFA token, which is actually sending it to their identity provider. And what they're doing is they're essentially stealing that token out of the air, and then they're using that in usually what's called a token replay attack to then go use a service on behalf of that user. It could be the financial system, payroll system, your Outlook inbox, your OneDrive, your SharePoint. And as we know, and I know Ivan will talk about a little bit later as well, is this is just patient zero. And a lot of times they'll then use that to pivot to someone else in the organization, to someone with higher privileges, to someone with more rights within their wire transfer system for their banks, and ultimately usually results in BEC mail campaigns, or can result in data theft, and even again spam the entire organization. I think it's important to understand that all these steps have different methods of protecting yourselves against, and we'll certainly go through a variety of different ways in which you can both detect, protect, and respond across all of them. But again, very common attack, and something we're seeing quite a lot out there in the wild, Adam.
Yeah, it's a great tee up, Rich. I think a couple things you highlighted that are really great call outs. So I think that just the pure fact of that MFA can be disarmed here, where you can use this token replay and steal a session. Obviously, a huge concerning point, because that does disarm the sort of traditional MFA technology and the thought process that, hey, like this, you add MFA and you can protect an account. But the other thing that you really highlighted here, Rich, is that you said at the end there, and kind of talking about the users. There is a sort of a crafty attempts being used here as part of this method, where we're seeing really targeted emails. Very good masquerading of like fake domains, and we're also seeing a lot of situations where the redirects and everything, they're tricky, right? So basic user education really may not be enough to stop this. Ideally they can be on the lookout for some of those tricks of like the email looks bogus or the domain gets faked out, and they would pick up on that. But they are so tactful now these days of how they're deploying these, that not only are they stealing a session, but the way they get in there and then they can land and expand your painting. It's pretty big, and it does require a little bit of a defense in-depth strategy to hit all points of the areas you highlighted, Rich. And so maybe, Rich, you can start us, and then we'll go a little bit deeper at line by line, just kind of high level. What are the general recommendations for before we get into the depth of each section that we would provide to our clients to look at, okay, how do you come about combating this threat?
Yeah, and I mean, I like you said, the defense in depth. I mean, that's a critical point, in my opinion. There's no one single setting, no one single tool, no one single function. It is kind of a layered, multi-layered approach. And we'll talk a lot about these, as you said, more in depth today. But let's start with some of the basics. So first and foremost is strengthening your session management. And a lot of folks have said, hey, we want the best user experience for our users, and we're going to allow them to cache their tokens for 7 days. And ultimately that leads to a potential 7-day window of risk, for stolen tokens, or even other methods even outside of this that stolen tokens can be leveraged for. So we definitely recommend looking at shortening session token lifetimes. There's some best practices from all the major IDPs on how to do that, but also what to do or where to set that up specifically. Session timeouts, another one specifically. They are mutually independent of each other. And then looking at using device-bound tokens, which we're going to talk a little bit about today as well. If you are a user of Microsoft's conditional access, which is a part of their zero trust framework and their SPE or security policy engine, use things like risk-based authentication. There are some base level controls and things within conditional access around just how and what you enforce. But there's also some other functions like token, some level of session token detection as well that could be helpful. We also find that hardening your MFA implementation is going to be one of the biggest items. Chris is going to go into detail, as well as me, in a little bit on this further. But looking at leveraging methods that support FIDO2 or WebAuthn are somewhat critical. And then if you are still a customer that's leveraging SMS, or phone call based, we do recommend talking about a deprecation plan for those. And that can be sometimes a little bit more complicated than just a discussion, just depending on types of users you support and what devices they have in or close to them. But getting out of those somewhat legacy methods are something we recommend. Also, Ivan will touch on this a little bit later, but leveraging your SIM and XDR tools specifically to look for session token issues. There's different logs that come in from platforms like Entra and M365 and other IDPs that are important to look for, like abnormal type of usage patterns and things like that. Also, I will never diminish the fact that you should have a modern endpoint detection response tool or EDR tool that's looking at behavior, for the fact that, as Adam said earlier, users will get, things will come to a specific point where users get a link or get, to a page somehow. So we still need, again, that defense in depth, and we need layers on the desktop and endpoint and browsers. A lot of the modern browsers are including some level of capabilities around detecting these types of things as well. But again, they can only be effective with all of these other pieces in place. Education is good. I think, Adam, you said it well as well there, is that education does only take you so far. With how rapid these threats are changing, with Gen AI kind of being in place, we're seeing new different methods every single day. So good baseline, but again, you got to build upon that. The last couple here are really around identity protection tools. So Entra ID, if you're a Microsoft customer in the IDP space, has identity protection capabilities for risk-based conditional access. Again, can kind of take different session level access based on the user risk. And we've said, defense in depth quite a few times now at this point, but, really it is, again, no one tool that's doing this. It's going to be a multitude, and we'll try to take you through quite a few of those today.
Thanks, Rich, for highlighting sort of like overall strategy, right? I think it does further compound the defense in depth method. No, there is no kind of silver bullet. I think we see a lot of clients where they don't even have the basic protections in this space to hit even pieces of this strategy, let alone maybe one or two things. Do you have any recommendations, Rich, for just kind of like, hey, where's a good place to start? Maybe start on a few tools and expand, of just kind of we advise clients on?
Yeah, I think if I was to pick two, I would say that definitely look at your session management. So look at the token lifetimes. I think that is a key part. And I mean, that's number two. Number one is absolutely look at phishing resistant methods, which we'll explain about what that means in a little bit here. But, as we'll get into some details here a little further, is looking at something like Authenticator's new device bound passkey capabilities that's already built into Authenticator, which as a Microsoft customer, you should already have deployed, is probably the easiest uplift from a user perspective and offering the highest level of security. So I wouldn't leave any meeting around securing identity and users without saying those two should be probably the top priorities.
Yeah, I think too, Rich, what you're highlighting is a lot of our client base does have some existing Microsoft tools in place as part of their base authentication, or they're leveraging it for email and their account access. So good place to start. One of the things, and we talked about this on the last webinar, that Microsoft has done really well with their security technology is, if you're even using a basic portion of it, you can up-level your licensing and really start to expand your security tooling without a huge amount of effort, right? And they've done a really good job at providing tooling that can be done under their entire suite that does help with a lot of this stuff, in addition to other security threats. And so what I was hoping we could do is maybe transition to Chris with that. And Chris, before we go further into the details on some of the components, maybe give us a little bit of just a high level of, hey, when we talk about the Microsoft space, what are some of the tooling available that sort of hits the kill chain we're talking about, and then maybe we can hop into some details.
Yep, definitely. Thanks, Adam. As Rich was mentioning, kind of showcasing in the MFA bypass kill chain, it's a good representation of all the different layers that you have to be concerned with. So ultimately, if we look at the Microsoft 365 security and compliance tooling that's represented here, this really helps you put together a defense in depth type of strategy. We can look at kind of these pillars of protect, detect, and response capabilities. Some of these were mentioned previously, and I'll go into more detail in just a little bit, specifically around some of the identity components. But ultimately, thinking about what protection capabilities do we have in Microsoft 365, one of the key ones being conditional access. As Rich was alluding to, I would say majority of almost all clients that we're working with are either using Microsoft Authenticator for MFA, or a little less secure would be SMS, text message, and phone call, right? So what Microsoft recently did was allowed you to essentially scope the different types of authentication methods and strengths to really address this problem, right? Because it is a big problem in regards to MFA bypass and our topic here. So ultimately, it helps you ease the transition into something like phishing resistant methods, which will directly address the token interception scenario. We'll see those different methods again in just a little bit, but it allows you to test with admins at first, or maybe expand to high risk users, and then hopefully ultimately FTEs or standard users eventually in your environment can be using these types of methods. So not only phishing resistant methods, but the signals that Defender will bring into this kind of defense in depth capabilities will allow talking with various services, including conditional access. You can send risk signals to conditional access and have various policies to act on those risk signals. It can even send signals to, say, Purview DLP and insider risk. So there's, again, a better together story, right, when you start to think of this layered approach. And even Intune compliance is one of those key pieces. So maybe enforcing a conditional access policy that says, only Intune compliant Windows devices are allowed to access your Microsoft 365 services and included SSO apps. So that's becoming more and more common. So that's really the protection layer, and we look at detect, from and looking at the kill chain, a phishing email coming in, right? What are those different risk signals that we can have the detection tools like Defender for Office 365, some advanced anti-phishing capabilities. Also, as I mentioned, the risk signals from Defender will send to conditional access. And then just Defender XDR overall has capabilities around adversary in the middle and response capabilities around that. And finally, kind of rounding things out is you have all these capabilities, those layers, those pillars. What about incident response, right, as one of those key areas? So again, those signals feeding to conditional access can have automated responses. You could reset the password. You could remove the session token. You could block the user, right, as common actions. But ultimately, something like Defender or Sentinel can have very custom actions using like Logic Apps or Power Automate and give you kind of limitless type of SOAR capabilities. So.
Yeah. So, Chris, appreciate the overview. And you did highlight each piece here, right, has sort of its own technical nuance. And so if we coming down a notch now, if we want to look at more in that protection space, if you want to give us maybe a dive deep a little bit, if you can, Chris, on like conditional access, what we're seeing with clients there. How do you put some passwordless strategies in place using this tooling to sort of help disrupt this attack method?
Yep, and everything we're talking about here that's kind of represented with this list is also passwordless. So there's even not even just the security aspect of it being phishing resistant, and go into more depth here in a second, but ultimately it is a passwordless technology. So if you are trying to get to a passwordless world, it's kind of a 1-2 punch here, right, from that perspective. But if we start to address the real problem, MFA bypass, and what you can do in Enter ID specifically, we want to look at authentication strengths in general. So there's a category of authentication methods that are considered phishing resistant listed here. So you have things like FIDO2 security keys, right? This could be a UV key or a phishing key, an actual hardware key that has a PIN set on it. So the user has, your credentials as usual from that perspective, right? Thinking about the levels of security, we have, username and password, not secure, right? As we all know, but we get into the different kind of standard levels of MFA, SMS, text message, and then you kind of go up to Microsoft Authenticator after that. And now we're talking above that, passwordless technologies that are also phishing resistant is really where you want to get to, right? So FIDO2 keys are one of those. There's also a capability in Microsoft Authenticator itself, which is essentially a FIDO2 key in Authenticator. It's called Authenticator app passkeys. If you compare those two, FIDO2 keys are security hardware keys are very seamless. And easy to use, but there's a hardware cost to that, right? So if you're deploying to anything above admins or maybe key users, you have to take that into account. But Authenticator app passkeys are built in, right? So as long as your users can use Microsoft Authenticator on iOS or Android, then they can be up and running with that technology. Two others that are related are Windows Hello for Business on the Windows 10, Windows 11 side. And then a newer one around Mac OS called Platform Credential for Mac OS. So very similar to Windows Hello on the Windows side, but you have a PIN system or biometrics that gives you that second factor, right? That makes it phishing resistant in that case. And then the last one listed here is certificate authentication. So as it has some more back-end requirements around the topology to get the certificates to the endpoints as one of the requirements, but ultimately it will check against that certificate, and only your trusted devices will have that certificate with the rest of the infrastructure. So these methods by themselves are phishing resistant and passwordless, but it's not enough to just stop here, right? So you can get users registered for these methods, but you need a way to enforce the methods, right? And that's when conditional access comes in.
So Chris, on those keys themselves, you kind of mentioned, so we're talking about the front door, right? Which you're talking about. So we want to secure the front door, but then behind that, there's more that comes. You kind of highlighted, right, like security keys, there's a physical need there, certificates, you do need some infrastructure for that. Microsoft, some of the things you highlighted is implementing some of the newer techniques like the Authenticator app passkeys, Windows Hello, the Mac OS stuff that's now out. What are you seeing with clients as far as like what mix of this key technologies are they using to maybe ease the rollout, or maybe there's a layered strategy in some cases? Kind of curious of like what you're seeing with our client base.
Yeah, I would say we're mostly seeing a starting point with admin roles in Microsoft 365. So any users that have admin roles generally get a FIDO2 key, I would say, right? It seems to be the most seamless. You're going to have less admins than FTEs in your environment, so it's a good starting point. When we get into kind of more of the standard user, I think that's where a lot of organizations that we're working with are just starting to test Authenticator app passkeys, right? And that process. So it's a different registration process on iOS versus Android, and Microsoft's streamlining it as much as possible. But again, I'd say the FIDO2 keys are the most seamless, right, from an end user experience, but also have that cost associated with them. So it's kind of that balancing act of, we've seen organizations fully deploy FIDO2 keys completely, right, and then the opposite of that is maybe only admins using FIDO2 keys.
Yeah, that makes sense. Level of sensitivity of what they have access to might warrant the level of depth you want to go for that access method, right?
Yep.
So that makes sense. Cool. All right. So moving past the front door, Chris, you're kind of transitioning to conditional access, which is definitely logical next step. So when we talk about like authentication strengths, conditional access, we're kind of now past that front door, so to speak. What kind of things are you working? Do you see with our client base? What are the recommendations for at this level of Microsoft technology that we're recommending?
Yep. So everything that kind of mentioned before are considered authentication methods, right? So you can scope those in Entra now. There's a migration process that's happening that essentially has a due date of the end of September, coming up very quick here. But ultimately, all the new authentication methods, the phishing resistant, even newer ones that are out, are there and scoped to either all users or say a group of users. So the strategy here is that you need to get users to register those methods, right, as the first step. But just by registering a FIDO2 key doesn't mean now you're secure. So that's where conditional access comes into play. So conditional access has what's called authentication strengths, and this allows you to determine what strength of authentication you're enforcing through conditional access. So kind of that phase one, phase two is, get a user to register a FIDO2 key, know that they're fully registered, it's reporting in, ready to go. And then now you can enforce, say, FIDO2 only, or FIDO2 and Windows Hello, or all 4 or 5 phishing resistant methods through conditional access. So that's kind of the final gate enforcement method to make sure that no matter how that user is authenticating, it's at its strongest authentication strength. So as part of that, you get into a passwordless world, and if that's my only authentication and I'm no longer using Microsoft Authenticator, what happens if I lose my FIDO2 key, right? So there's a lot of new conversations about onboarding lost devices, and that's where a newer technology called temporary access pass and Entra ID comes in. This allows you to have a temporary time-bound password that essentially counts for that authentication strength to get you in to register that new device. So if you lost your FIDO2 key, you get sent a new one, you get in with a tap, and again, you can only use it once potentially, or you can only use it within say a 4-hour period, whatever the case may be. It's customizable, and now you're able to use that in that specific scenario. So that's kind of all new, I would say, right? The old method is calling the help desk, et cetera, whatever the case may be. So that you just really have to take that into account from an overall operational standpoint. And then, what was briefly mentioned is that with those new methods and scoping, you can now deprecate older methods that are less secure, right? So is there a reason for anyone to use SMS in your environment? They can be the very limited exclusions, whereas no one else can even attempt to register SMS or ever use it again. It's kind of one of the places you want to get to. So I would say those are some of the key initiatives we're working with almost every client on, is getting the phishing resistant methods and then also reducing the older, less secure methods at the same time. So.
Yeah, it makes sense. And one of the things that you mentioned once or twice, Chris, which is I think critical, kind of coming back to what Rich had said as well, is there is a lot in this space for people to consider of like, okay, these different settings, where do you start? And so what I've heard a couple times, Chris, that you're emphasizing is start granular, maybe pick the highest risk targets like admin accounts, and then span out. So is that kind of the general approach you usually work with clients when we're starting? Kind of look where to start, target and then expand.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, admins, high value targets where it makes sense. But ultimately, as you can see, a regular user has access to a lot of information, right? And if you can steal a token and essentially become that user with that access, it gets into the data protection, data exfil, why an attacker's there in the first place. So eventually what I hope, and I think what it's leaning towards is, all users will have phishing resistant methods, where possible.
Yeah, it makes sense. I love also in the Microsoft case, you highlighted that one-time pass key, like taking out those scenarios where someone can bypass a password of like, hey, an onboarding, help desk, sometimes send an email to a person that's either encrypted or they're calling them on the phone. And we do see Microsoft starting to iterate on this technology. And there has been other stuff that's implemented. So we have some other conditional access controls highlighted that are some of the stuff's fairly new. So you want to walk us through that too, Chris?
Yeah. So when I was mentioning kind of a conditional access overall, you have various signals, and they're considered user risk or sign-in risk, and there's different categories underneath there. So there's a few that are listed here specifically around MFA bypass. So signals around anomalous token, token issuer anomaly, kind of very similar there. Taking those signals in, having increased risk with a user. You can then use conditional access to say once it's reached this increased risk, say it's medium or high risk from these signals, then you could block access or even require a password reset. So those are the most common kind of actions that help automate that and combat, that response pillar that we mentioned earlier. But there are a few other components here like token protection. It's generally available for Windows, but it's in preview for other platforms. So it's very similar to kind of the idea behind the phishing resistant components, where the token is stamped on the device you're using. So if they try and replay that token on another device, it won't allow it, essentially. So that can become a direct, mechanism fairly soon here in the future once it kind of expands to the rest of the platforms. And then also Intune compliance as another mechanism, as I mentioned earlier. All the signals that go into making or saying that a device is compliant are all very similar to what we've been talking about. Defender XDR signals. Does it have the latest threat protection? Is it up to date? Are there any vulnerabilities, et cetera? That can tell if a device is compliant or not from that perspective. And then a newer kind of thought around this is Defender for Cloud Apps is part of Defender XDR. It's Microsoft's CASB capabilities and much more. But ultimately, one of the areas here is that you could use conditional access and what's called session controls to maybe limit risky behavior. So if I take these signals and I get into a high risk situation, I could block download for the user. I could, encrypt files or label files with purview as an example. So try and address, the real problem of like data exfil potentially as a response mechanism. So those are, again, I think the key term around this is defense in depth, right? So no silver bullet per se, just in conditional access, and it kind of expands from there.
Yeah, I think a good thing to that you're highlighting, Chris, is like talk about that initial attempt, right? We want to make sure that the person who is at the keyboard is the person that's actually there and it's not an adversary. And so just like a plethora of opportunities on the Microsoft space of how to attack that in terms of having better authentication strength, Having different methods that you're validating that person is beyond that key. And then as they go through their session, how to pick up on like anomalous behavior. So we're really, good amount of opportunities. We kind of you got into Defender at the end there as far as like, hey, starting to pick up signal, right? And how do we, maybe leverage Defender broadly? One of the things that Defender has implemented is actually some adversary in the middle attack disruption, which I think is pretty unique to their XDR platform. And so I think we want to talk about that a little bit. Maybe Rich, if you could walk us through AITM attack disruption on the Defender side, I think it's definitely worth to highlight as far as what it can provide to the clients if you're using Defender in your space.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so attack disruption is one of those features, in my opinion, that's it's not very well known that it exists. It got launched, I think, in the last 12 months, but there are different types of very specific playbooks that Microsoft will affect when they see, again, very specific types of events. So attack disruption is a function of Defender XDR. It leverages signal across all of Defender XDR. So again, looking at signal from emails coming into MDO to an execution of a file downloaded from the Outlook client on an endpoint to the exfil of data through a cloud SaaS provider or a ransomware type of event. They've documented a couple of these different types of attack disruptions. It's important to note they will take these actions on your behalf if explicitly deemed to be a large-scale ransomware event, or in the case of attack disruption, when they see these high confidence type of events, they will actually stop those events from occurring. Their goal is to kind of get out ahead of the actual incident or event through very explicit responses to very explicit signals. So this is a quick example of what an attack disruption event looks like. Basically what you're seeing in there is that there is an identification of a high confidence event. Again, AITM is one type of attack disruption. There are others, but this is using signal from MDO, MDE, MDI, MDA, et cetera, all the fun Defender acronyms, and be based on that specific signal, it will actually take the automated action and disable that account. So if you think about your processes today, you may have playbooks or processes or SOPs to revoke a user's access token, reset their password, notify their manager, et cetera. All the technical aspects of that, not necessarily the user communication, when it's deemed to be explicitly this type of attack, is going to be taken by Microsoft automatically. Again, it's kind of a feature not a lot of folks talk about, but between this and attack disruption for things like ransomware events, Microsoft has some pretty interesting statistics on how this has decreased the overall effectiveness of some of these events. So again, in this case, once that session token is revoked, then at that point, it doesn't matter if it was stolen or not based on the signal received. That token is validated and can't be used. So again, a super helpful thing. And even more importantly, this is one of, in my opinion, the best things about an XDR platform is that, we're leveraging signal from email, from endpoint, from SaaS app, from, Active Directory and such. This is very hard to do when we look at more traditional SIEM, or when we look at our clients who have a combination of third-party tools that don't really integrate well together. Something like Defender XDR and what and how it does it is important, because all of these pieces and signal and entities are automatically aligned and mapped. And again, you have even some built-in type of SOAR capabilities that will take kind of the more high confidence events and take action on them themselves.
One of the interesting parts too, Rich, that we look at in this space when we talk about this type of threat or more modernized threats is that tactics evolve, right? So whatever great technology is implemented could be disarmed by some new method that we're unaware of. And the XDR piece, which you highlighted, Rich, I think is really powerful, just in terms of being able to take a bunch of signal across various interfaces that may be coming into the environment, and then stitch those together and say, hey, this actually does look concerning. It's needed for these more advanced threats, right? And I think that's definitely one of the reasons to highlight it here is Microsoft. If you have a lot of this stuff turned on in the environment and you're leveraging their technology, you're able to kind of stitch that together. And for something that may not have been seen before, it can still flag it because it doesn't match sort of previous pattern behavior that a user may be doing in the environment. And that's pretty powerful in addition to some of the other tools that we're walking through here.
Yeah, agreed.
So awesome. So Chris and Rich gave us kind of a great highlight on the protect and then into the detect space. I want to segue over to Ivan now here. And so Ivan's team in the SOC, we see hundreds and thousands of these account compromises that come in, unfortunately, and that's actually one of the reasons we wanted to do the second webinar, because it's so concerning. You know, Chris and Rich hear from a lot of the clients in the consulting space. Ivan's team sees it in the SOC of like, hey, it's happening, right? And so what I was hoping to, we can have Ivan maybe capture from like our SOC, right? Give a little bit of a view of like how often are we actually seeing this, and then we can kind of look at also like what is our security teams in our SOC actually help our clients with when it comes to tuning. But maybe Ivan, you can give us just kind of a bite-sized view of like, okay, how much is this happening from what we see?
Absolutely. So roughly 20% of all incidents that are coming into our SOC are related to some form of user risk, either suspicious activity, unfamiliar sign-in properties, or some kind of risky situation coming from EDR products or other components within Entra and the Microsoft Security workspace. The problem is that with more than 100,000 events on a daily basis for an average size customer, if you have 20% related to user risk, that is pretty much impossible to verify on a one-by-one basis. So you have to actually think of more clever ways to filter noise. If you look at the pie chart that we provided here, only roughly 5% of all incidents coming in for user risk are actually true positive and require attention. And through Defender, XDR, and Microsoft Sentinel, we're actually able to automate more than 60% of the responses for true positive cases. But the main problem here is false positives and benign positive incidents, which we'll discuss how to fine-tune in the next few slides. These are so many that it's very difficult to spot the instances that require attention. So if you don't have automation, or if you're not properly tuned, the initial response may be delayed, and some damage can be caused by that.
Yeah, that's a staggering number, Ivan. When you talk about 20% of all incidents down to, of those 20%, 5% of them are actually valid account compromises, right? And so, and filtering down noise is a huge need in this space. Can you know, when we start talking about tuning, Ivan, maybe if we start with Entra as an example, a lot of the stuff that Chris and Rich brought in. What are the types of things, and when we onboard a client, for example, or you guys are in the tenant space, how do you, in this, on the Entra side, start reducing the noise a bit or do some tuning so that what alerting is coming through is a bit more effective?
There are two ways of tuning. Actually, there are two parallel streams of tuning, if I have to be more accurate. We are tuning how alerts are being opened in Sentinel and how our team is handling alerts. And together with that, we're actually fine-tuning the solutions themselves to give us more accurate information and to be set at thresholds that are balanced between user comfort and efficiency. Some of the most critical examples that we provided here, starting with MFA denied responses, we actually tend to work with our customers individually to fine-tune the thresholds that will raise alerts. So we can actually see events related to MFA fatigue. And this is important because this is like a very early indicator of something happening or account being targeted. And then we work with our customers to collect information where this is coming from. Are there any legacy protocols being used? This is starting to phase out because a lot of applications are already using modern protocols, but still some customers are coming in opened with legacy protocols like POP3, and this is causing a lot of issues because these don't even support MFA and can be used as a very easy entry point. Apart from that, it's really important when you're setting up conditional access and user risk to properly fine-tune your environment so you can filter out the known locations your users are logging in from. For example, corporate egress points, VPN exit points, IP addresses, country rules. So if you're working only from US, you can actually limit through conditional access users from logging in from other countries. And then if you have traveling users, employees at your workplace, you can set up watch lists, dynamic watch lists that can be updated with a list of travelers with a certain time frame, which is going to greatly reduce the number of false positives on your end. And apart from that, also configuring in these watch lists your VIP users, your service accounts, and setting up special alerting for them, so you have more sensitive and higher priority alerts coming in from these is also a very efficient method of detecting early indicators of compromise. Apart from that, simply from a conditional access and user risk perspective, we always recommend to start with monitoring only, and gradually, as Chris already explained, gradually move up the ladder of securing your most sensitive accounts down to the regular employee. And some of the examples we provided here that we actually recommend to our customers is to require another MFA prompt at medium sign-in risk and directly block users at high risk coming from entry identity protection, especially for sensitive roles. And then also tune the user risk policy to force password resets at anything over medium. It brings a little discomfort, but it keeps you much more secure.
Yeah, it's I like what you highlighted too, Ivan, on the tuning specifically on suspicious sign-ins and looking at some of the impossible travel scenarios. I know you and I have talked previously about this. This is probably one of the noisiest spaces if you just turn it on and don't do tuning and don't have a regard, right? So your team does spend a fair amount of time when we talk about tuning. Would you consider this, I guess, a lot of the generators of noise, if not effectively tuned?
Only atypical travel alerts, only they cause around 10 to 12% of the noise coming in from user risk. So pretty much 50% of the noise is coming in exactly through these two rules, unfamiliar signing properties and atypical travel.
Yeah, and so I wanted to highlight that because like you're emphasizing, Chris is emphasizing, like definitely want to turn some of this stuff on, but have regard to where your users are accessing from. Make sure you have some tunings in up front. Otherwise, you may turn them on and then you get 1,000 alerts, and then you're back to the pie chart that we were showing, right? Which is not where we want to be. Cool. So moving through Entra now into Defender, Ivan, we talked a lot about like what opportunities we have into the Defender suite to pick up on signal and some noise there. So can you walk us through in Defender for Office and XDR some of the tunings that you work with our client base to get more effective alerting as well?
Absolutely. It's very important to try and block these alerts as early as possible, of course. That's why we're starting with Defender for Office and the anti-phishing policies. The fine-tuning that our team does there, particularly around impersonation protection for VIPs and domains, company domains, and then separately use more aggressive thresholds for higher risk users, proves to be very effective. The only problem is, you, as already mentioned, you will need, especially for normal users, you will need some additional trainings when it comes to recognizing phishing and reporting phishing, because we use machine learning and user behavioral analytics in Sentinel. So the more people actually report phishing emails, the better Defender and Sentinel will become at recognizing these for your environment. And everything will work together with safe links and safe attachment. Of course, this is something that you have to absolutely enable to try and protect your URLs and payloads. And then moving to Defender for endpoint, some of the more classic features like detect token depth and suspicious browser behavior, making sure that all the rules there are enabled and reporting into Sentinel so we can have successful correlation. Attack surface reduction is another really useful tool in Defender that helps not only with user risk and MFA bypass, but with a lot of other problems that are typically seen in user machines. But there specifically, we have a policy to block potential harvesting tools, and not only block but also report it into Sentinel. So we will have a high severity alert that we're going to review rather fast and see what else is happening for users, so we can decide if we want to block that user or not. And then web protection, which will help block known phishing domains and reverse proxies, which is a good tool to have. It doesn't always help with zero-day threats, but that's why we have everything else fine-tuned so we can detect it early as well.
Yeah, what I like about when we talk about tuning Defender, Office, and on the endpoint, Ivan, I mean, it's inevitable some of this stuff's going to get through, right? Like it may happen. And so some of these tools give us the capability to, after an email is delivered, or hopefully before, or somebody's clicking on the link, or they've clicked on it and then the URL is brought up. Like you have an opportunity to start disrupting that chain further down the line, right? But it is to some extent inevitable, like it's going to happen, right? Someone's going to click on it. They're going to get in. So hopefully, you've implemented some of these things along the way and it was successful. But if it does get through, a lot of what we focus on for our client base is actually then automating response, right? So the goal is always the defense in depth. You sort of get each of these areas implemented, or you try to get as many as you can, but eventually it gets through, right? So, and then we look at, okay, how can we quickly shut it down when it does happen? And so, Ivan, can you walk us through just more on like the store automation side? What are some of the things we do with clients where, okay, one of these things happens, how do we quickly shut that down, and kind of how often are you seeing that implemented with our client base?
We have three primary rules that we're using with user risk. This is at, as we already mentioned, at medium severity user risk, we always revoke user sessions and force new login with new MFA prompt. At medium plus, we can actually, and we do force user passwords resets. And then as a last measure, if we see adversary in the middle or other strong indicators of compromise, we can set up customized alerting in Sentinel to actually automatically isolate devices and put them in quarantine. So then we can have enough time to investigate and collect everything and talk with our customers, making sure that we're not spreading anything else in the environment. But it's actually quite simple here. The revoke user session is the most heavily used automation. It is less disrupting when it comes to user comfort, and it still helps actually quite efficiently. We have it around roughly 60%. Another 30% are the password resets at our customers, which come at some user discomfort level, but still limit pretty much every possibility of credential theft. And to mention something, when we're doing a user password reset, we're also automatically revoking all user sessions as well. So the password resets include revoke user sessions. And lastly, between 10 and 13%, we have device isolation, where we automatically block devices and ask questions later. Here, it's important to mention that we have some additional capabilities, and we recommend some additional capabilities and filtering around user groups that are targeted by this automation, because it's important not to disrupt VIPs and important meetings. You can imagine if you walk into a meeting and all of a sudden your computer doesn't work. So it's recommended to start with specific user groups and test it there. And if it works okay, you can eventually grow the scope of the automation. But it can be quite dangerous, so you need to be very careful with it.
Yeah, it's a great highlight, Ivan. I think it's really helpful what you colored for, like, hey, revoke user session. That's a little more kid glove approach, right? You're going to force a login prompt to happen again. That's a little less disruptive. These other techniques are obviously a bit more aggressive, but depending on the environment you're in, right, you could also set some of this stuff based on certain accounts. Automate those functions to be more aggressive, and then your user base, your common user base, you maybe take less aggressive actions. I think the benefit, no matter what, is if you look at deploying some automation capability here, you're going to be able to quickly either shut something down if it does get through, and have some time to investigate that after the fact to make sure no damage happened. And so we definitely encourage clients to deploy this. And appreciate you giving us a little bit of a view of what you've seen most effective and what's leveraged most, Ivan, on that. So I think with that, we're going to sort of wrap up the webinar. I did want to give a little bit of a summary. So we covered a lot here. And I think what's clear, hearing from Chris, Rich, and Ivan, there's a big picture here, right? And that's why this threat is so prevalent out there, is it's easy to do for the threat actors, and able to get in the environment, and it does require pieces of the chain. Chris kind of highlighted in the beginning that you can start small and span out, right? So if we take that same attack method that we demonstrated, that Rich walked through, right? You can see the pieces of the suite here of the Microsoft side. Why we recommend Microsoft Security in this space is because they do have tools that cover each portion of this chain, right? Like, you've got Defender for Office that hopefully is going to get in front of those phishing emails, or is going to see those malicious URLs and block it. You've got the front door for conditional access that Chris ran through, different keys, levels of compliance, token protection, ways to stop that account from actually getting compromised. After an account gets compromised, you're looking at Entra ID, risky sign-ins. And then if, unfortunately, if it does happen, then you've got things like Defender XDR and cloud apps that are able to pick up on bad signals, something happening in the environment, right? And then all through that, as Ivan highlighted, you can leverage Defender XDR and some SOAR functionality to actually shut things down. Or if, like, the adversary in the middle attack disruption picks up on things, you can actually automate response, as Rich highlighted. So hopefully this gives you a little bit of a summary of the call of start somewhere to either get in front of the threat, or you may have some of this technology in your environment today with your existing licensing. You can turn some of these things on, experiment. I think the team gave some really good tuning opportunities here. And I will say, as a reminder, we do look at the questions in the webinar. So if you haven't asked a question and you need some assistance with this, or you want any feedback, please feel free to reach out and contact us. Thank you, and have a great day.
Thank you.